place. This is Anthony once again with Book Talk. And today we have a very great guest, and I'm believing that you're going to enjoy really this show. And it's none other than Richard Stone with a book, quite an interesting book, I believe, known as Story Intelligence. Sounds good, isn't it? So, whoever is joining us, I would like you to be an active participant. If you can ask questions, if you can input on anything, that would be good. But why don't we give this opportunity to just welcome Richard Stone, who is for about 30 years an expert on storytelling and its application on business, healthcare, and education. And he's been talking to various organizations around the US, including some 500 Fortune companies. So, Richard Stone, welcome to our show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Anthony. Good to be with you today.
Yeah,
Appreciate
I appreciate. Thank you.
it.
So,
Yeah.
please tell us a bit more about yourself.
Well, I tell people I didn't set out to be involved with storytelling early in my life. That wasn't something I said, oh, I want to grow up and do work with storytelling.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, but I've been in the communication business for many years, and in an earlier lifetime, I was running an advertising agency in Orlando, Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and I was selling it. I had decided I had to get out of that business. It was killing me. It was too.
Okay.
It was. I was working myself to the bone,
Yeah.
and I was out backpacking out west in the western part of the United States, and was flying back to Florida. And two people were seated next to me on the plane, and they were backpackers. And so, when backpackers get together, have you hiked this trail? You hike that trail?
Yeah.
And at some point, they said, "Have you ever been to the National Storytelling Festival?"
Mm-hmm.
And I had no clue what that was.
Yeah.
But here in the United States, in Jonesboro, Tennessee, which is not far from Atlanta, where I live, maybe about
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 hours, um, about 10,000 people show up the first weekend of October to listen to the best storytellers from around the world. They really bring all the best storytellers from around the world. And it's a very folksy event. They set up revival-sized tents around the town, and
Mm-hmm.
people just sit and congregate and listen to these great storytellers. And I got to know these people, and they invited me to come up with them that year. And I went up, and I had like an epiphany in the audience. I was sitting there going, "This is what I'm supposed to be doing." And
Ah.
and I was listening to a third generation farmer from Minnesota, which is in the central part of the country,
Okay.
talking about his experiences running a farm, and that was about as far from my life experiences as I could you can imagine. But the power of story is that we can go to other people's places and where they live, and we can experience what they experienced. And for me,
Yeah.
it was very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized at that moment I wanted to do something with storytelling. I had no clue what that looked like.
Yeah.
But I embarked. My company sold soon after that, and then I embarked on a career in story, which
Mm-hmm.
has been kind of interesting journey, to say the least. And it's led me to work with a whole wide variety of people and companies. Early on in my career, I was working with hospices. I don't know if you're familiar with hospice, Anthony,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's working with people who are at the end of life
Mm-hmm.
and providing a kind of comfort and care for them.
Yeah.
And when we reach the end of our lives, if we have not really reviewed our life and taken a stock of, what have we learned, what's been valuable in these experiences along the way, if we haven't done that, then then we often don't know what it's meant. And
Yeah.
so I began designing, training people how to do that well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Oh, that's quite interesting. I mean, I can't imagine that whole congregation of so many thousands of people who've just come together to share stories and experience life in a new dimension through words. That's
That's
quite
right.
interesting.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you making it a lifetime, I mean, a business, and you are in it, and I mean, some of the things we don't even, we can't even imagine how someone will take a story and make it a business, make it a life. That's quite
Well,
interesting.
yeah, and I didn't, I didn't, that wasn't what I set out to do, but at some point I had a client, a previous client in the advertising business,
Hmm.
and I began having these thoughts that leaders need to be good storytellers,
Yeah,
and that that storytelling might be a way of addressing kind of difficult problems in businesses. And I went to him and I said, "Hey, Chuck, I'm thinking about these ideas. Do you have a problem here in your business that
yeah.
maybe we could test this on?"
Hmm.
And he was in the pest control business.
Okay.
Um, and he did have a problem. There was a in South Florida. There's a kind of little ant. They call it a ghost ant because it's so teeny.
Okay.
And and his guys weren't doing a very good job of getting rid of the ghost ant. And it turns out if you don't do it right, the ghost ants freak out
Yeah.
and they create two colonies. So now you got double problems.
Yeah.
And he was having to send people out to retreat, and it was costing him a lot of money. He said, "You can fix that for me. You got something." And so we began experimenting with what was being communicated by the managers to the people who were doing the work.
Hmm.
And often what happens in businesses are often at cross purposes.
Yeah.
That one hand you say, hey, you want to do it right, and the other hand say you want to do it quick. And in this case, they were trying to get it done quick, but they weren't doing it right.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do you reinforce in the minds of people the idea of what's important?
Hmm.
What's really the most important thing? And sometimes we have competing values in our
Yeah.
lives, and we have to kind of balance those. And this is important and this is important. Well, which one do I give attention to?
Yeah.
And there are consequences, like in every story where something happens, a character does something, and there are consequences. In life, there are consequences, and so
Yeah.
stories allow us to visit the future,
Hmm.
imagine going someplace and doing something, and seeing what the consequences are without having to suffer them.
Hmm.
So we can. It's like a simulation. We can kind of simulate the future and go, oh gosh, if I did that, I don't think it's going to turn out very well in my life or for my career or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, so that was the beginning of the work for me, and so in the work, one of the things that I tell leaders is that they have to become masters of story.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we have been thinking about for some time is that we each have an innate capacity to tell stories. In fact, we're
Hmm.
all wired for it.
Hmm.
And most people aren't aware that we're wired for story.
Yeah.
And our brains have been, we've evolved for hundreds of thousands of years, and people have been gathering around central fires every evening to tell stories. And you can go back to hundreds of thousands of years ago to the cave drawings, and you can find those caves in every continent of the world where people were capturing their experiences.
Yeah.
And I think those cave drawings weren't just capturing their experiences. I think they were the early PowerPoints.
Mhm.
I think what people were doing was that they were
Yes.
teaching
Mhm.
younger people about, well, if you're going to take down a woolly mammoth, that's a pretty big animal, and it's easy to get crushed or get gored by one of their tusks. So, let me tell you the stories of the things that you need to avoid.
Yeah.
How do you do this successfully? And
Mhm.
so we have been telling stories for hundreds of thousands of years. Really, and often they are cautionary tales. Don't do this, because if you
Mhm.
do this, something bad will happen. You're better off to do this over
Yeah.
here.
Mhm.
Don't go to that watering hole at 8 o'clock in the morning, because the tiger is always there drinking at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the last person who went at 8 o'clock in the morning didn't come back.
Yeah.
He became the tiger's breakfast.
Yeah.
So we've been telling stories for a long time, so we're wired for it.
Mhm.
And so the idea that we would use stories in our organizational life, but also in our family life,
Mhm.
um, is not a new idea. We've been doing this forever.
Yeah. It's not.
And so, in some ways, people are rediscovering what has been obvious.
Mm-hmm.
that we've been doing. We're all wired for that. What do you do at the end of the day when you get together with your spouse or your friends or your girlfriend or boyfriend? How was your day and what happened? And this happened, and you won't believe what I saw today. And this person on the freeway almost cut me off, and they spun out. Whatever.
Yeah.
So we tell stories all the time about our experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and we're swimming in stories.
Yeah.
We're all swimming in stories right now, and not all stories are true. And so we often ingest those stories
Mm-hmm.
without examining them. We just sort of eat them, take them in, and they have a way of implanting themselves in our consciousness in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't even realize they take up residence.
Yeah. I mean, they shape us. They shape our mind and the way we think and the way we do things. The stories
Yes.
that we hear. Uh, I would be very interested to hear the story you gave, or the story that you you made up in order to give the company workers how they were going to control the ghost ants.
Oh, there goes days. Oh boy, we're
Yeah.
going back a long way. Well, we basically we ask the question, what do we want them to do? How do
Mhm.
we want them to behave?
Yes.
And so, well, I think that if I recall, what we did was we found stories of people who were doing it well
Hmm.
and where they weren't having to go back and retreat. Let me tell you the story about Bill.
Okay.
Bill's one of our top treatment people. Bill
Mhm.
hasn't had to retreat for ghost ants for over a year now, and let me tell you what he does
Yeah.
and why. And because he does that, not only is he our most valued employee, uh,
Mhm.
Bill got a big bonus this year because he didn't have to go back and retreat.
I see what you
So
there.
so what you do with these stories is you create exemplars for how
Mm-hmm.
to behave.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a guy named David Armstrong here in this country in the U.S. who runs
Yeah.
a company called Armstrong International,
Mm-hmm.
and most companies have a set of policies and procedures. And when you join the company, they give you a manual with all the do's and don'ts.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you do, and here's what and if you do these things over here, this will get you either reprimanded or fired.
Yeah. And some of the
And
things are intimidating. I mean, a bit of
yeah,
this is
but
really,
but often it's a very thick book, and
yeah.
everybody kind of nods their head, and it goes on a shelf,
Yeah.
forgotten. And David recognized that, and he loved collecting stories from his employees.
Yeah.
And one of the story that has stuck with me is sort of iconic is that they had various values. Every organization values different things, and one, they
Mm-hmm.
value creativity. They
Yeah.
really value people being creative.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they were also a manufacturing facility, so they valued safety.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to endanger anybody's life.
Yeah.
And one day, a guy spilled some alcohol on the shop floor, on the concrete
Mm-hmm.
floor.
Mm-hmm.
And he's thinking, how do I clean up this alcohol? If I clean it up with rags, then I'll have rags soaked with alcohol. Now, what
Mm-hmm.
do I do with the rags?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
And so he thought, well, I'll burn it off. And so he burned. It's a concrete floor. He burned the alcohol off, and it was successful,
Yeah.
and he got fired because he was being creative, but he
Yes.
violated the rule that was even a more important rule, which was keeping everybody safe.
Yes.
He could have possibly burned the place down
They
and hurt
definitely.
and destroyed the building,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps killed people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could put in a book, say safety always is more important than creativity, or
Mm-hmm.
you could tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
Which are you going to remember? You'll
Yeah.
remember the story. I remember that story. I read it 30 years ago and I still remember it.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
stories have a way of sticking with us, and
Mm-hmm.
they become kind of reminders about how should I behave here. And if you look at every religious tradition
Mm-hmm.
across the world, what are our great religious leaders, what were they doing? They're filled with stories.
They give
You know,
stories,
the
stories
yeah,
and stories. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's stories that tell you what to do and what not to do, and show you what happens if you do violate certain kinds of accepted norms. And and so Christianity, Jesus taught with parables, but he
Mhm.
came out of the Jewish tradition, which is filled with stories. All the Old Testament is mostly stories, but you can go look to the Far East, to Buddhism and Hinduism. What do
Yeah,
you have? You have stories.
yeah, yeah.
And all these religions have used story as a way of spreading a perspective and point of view
Hmm.
to the people who follow them, and
Yeah.
and they're inspiring. Many of these stories are very inspiring. They inspire us to do better things, to make our lives better, to do the right thing by people, and to lead a good life.
They sure do. I actually wrote a book a few months back, my first book, and it's called Be Good for Good. And it's stories of goodness with lessons on life. The
Yes.
stories, the stories of how I grew up in a farm. And you mentioned the person that you was talking about who was from a farm, and you talked about stories of the farm. You'll find them in that book. So uh, stories are sticking to the mind. I mean, stories help us remember things, and the lessons that are in the stories stick more when we hear stories than when we are just told of some rules. Some, I mean, stories are very great tools to use to
Yeah,
remember.
and I know both in some African traditions and
Mhm.
Native American traditions, there's been such a deep understanding of how important story was to community life and
Yeah.
to the survival of
Mhm.
community. One person I studied with for many years was a woman
Mhm.
named Paula Underwood, who is Native American. She came out of the Oneida tradition, which in this country, before Europeans came here, uh, there was a federation of tribes that stretched all the way from the Northeast almost to Michigan. And it was
Mhm.
called the Iroquois Federation, and the Oneida were part of those people.
Yeah.
And they did not, in her, so Paula can trace her lineage back to the Oneida,
Mhm.
and they did not even have a word for teach. The
Okay.
closest translation would be enabler of learning. And so
Mhm.
after the telling of a story, they would never say, now let me tell you what this story means and what
Yeah.
this means. They would never do that. They would say, what might you learn from this story?
Mhm. Mhm.
And they would get a child. They would start very young telling some of these learning tales to children. And
Mhm.
then, at age 3 or 4, you hear the story for the first time. And then maybe age 7 or 8, then maybe at age 15.
Mhm.
And as we grow older and mature, we see things differently than,
Yeah.
year old sees the world differently than a 5-year old.
Mhm.
And we begin to continue to glean lessons from the stories.
Mhm.
And and so I've taken that to heart and found that to be really, really important, is a way of engaging people with thinking about themselves and thinking about their place in the world and what they're doing,
Yeah.
and then also respecting how they see the world.
Mhm.
So a 5-year old, children have a kind of wisdom that we adults don't have.
Yeah.
They sometimes see things in much simpler terms, but often more in a clearer way.
Mhm.
And we adults, because we develop habits of ways we see the world, we sometimes can't see the simple things any longer.
Mhm.
We've kind of developed. There's a concept that I talk about in the book called, that it was developed by a neuropsychologist called Donald Hebb. His name is
Mhm.
Donald Hebb. Is that neurons that fire together wire together.
Mhm.
And so when we do things over and over again, we develop neural kind of pathways that get sort of, all these neurons sort of get used to it. So in the morning, or the evening, you can brush your teeth and also read a magazine and
Yeah.
maybe do something else. You can go on autopilot with that, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
The
sure.
brain the brain can kind of take over. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so we lay down, us adults, we lay down neural pathways. We find ways of doing things that are, efficient for us,
Mhm.
and we stop trying and experimenting and exploring.
Mhm.
And so but children are exploring all the time, and their brains have lots of neural connections because it's all new,
Mhm.
and they haven't laid down these tried and true pathways, And so they're more open in a sense to the world than we are as adults, because
Yeah.
we develop a certain way of seeing things that is useful, but sometimes it's not useful. It isn't adaptive for us.
Mhm.
Um, so one of the things that we adults can do is learning to ask the question, what might I learn from this? Is there another way of seeing the world than the way I've been seeing it?
Mhm.
Is there another way of seeing myself in my place in my relationships with people?
Yeah.
Um, and we develop habits of behavior with people that sometimes aren't very useful for us.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to change a habit because it's wired in.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
wired in. So we
Yeah.
have to lay down new neural pathways by doing something, and you have to practice it over and over again. And um, I've decided I wanted to learn at my age. I wanted to learn how to play the saxophone,
Yeah.
and I'm taking saxophone lessons now.
Okay.
And
That's
I've never played a wind instrument,
mhm.
and so I'm laying down new neural pathways as I'm having to learn the fingering on the instrument, and how to work my mouth and how to produce a sound, and this is a whole new thing for my brain, and um, so hopefully it'll make me a more flexible person.
You should. You should. Now, let me ask a question. At what point, I mean, through the experiences that you've had, that you started to embrace storytelling, and then you went away and started giving stories and started teaching about storytelling. At what point did you write this book?
Oh well, this book was just written. It just was released in March, and um, the beginning of this book started a few years ago.
Okay,
I have a partner, a man named Scott Livengood, who wrote the book with me,
okay,
and he's been a business partner. And I met Scott through the National Storytelling Festival years ago, and at that
okay.
time he was running a company here in the United States called Krispy Kreme Donuts,
Mhm.
and was very successful with that. And but we've when he left Krispy Kreme, we maintained our friendship through the years, and we started working together, I guess, about 5 years ago.
Mhm.
And over dinner one night, we were musing. We were developing programs. We call it the Master Story Experience. We think that for us to live our best life, we have to discover what is the core story of
Yeah.
our life.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's different ways of thinking about it and talking about it.
Mhm.
And so we think that we all have a calling in life,
Yeah.
and we have to discover what that is. I think we come into life with it, and then our job is and it's not apparent always,
Yeah.
and then we get socialized. We grow up in a family and in a society, and we're told who we should be and what we should be and how we should dress and how we should behave,
Mhm.
and sometimes that covers up what maybe is what we need to be doing, which may be countercultural. Maybe it's not acceptable in whatever culture we're growing up in for us to be an artist, for example,
Yeah.
or to be a storyteller or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Uh, so we have to figure that out. But we were having dinner one night, and I said, we were wondering what would be if we were going to, if there were powers of story, what would they be?
Yeah.
And on a napkin, how often ideas start out, you start scribbling on a little piece of paper.
Mhm.
And we identified initially 7 powers of story that we
Okay.
think are really essential to effective living. And they are to transport,
Mhm.
is the first one. And what stories do is they take us to another place in time.
Okay.
Okay, and so if in Western storytelling, there's and in every tradition, I would be curious what it's like in your culture where you grew up.
Yeah.
There's often, the storyteller starts out with something to key the audience that we're getting ready to go into story time.
Mhm.
So you've heard Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and that shows up in a lot of cultures all over the world.
Mhm.
There are others that are very cultural specific that the storyteller, in Haiti, I think they say crick, and the audience has to say crack.
Mhm.
And that's also so there are all these different kind of entrees to tell the storyteller or tell the audience, hey, we're leaving real time or we're getting ready to go into story time to another place in time. It could be in the future, it could be in the past,
Uh-huh.
It could be in an unreal world science fiction or whatever it is. It could be a fable. We're going to enter into a world where all the characters are animals,
Yes.
but they kind of act like human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So, so stories do that
Yeah.
powerfully for us. And
In
we
Swahili, it's paukwa, pakawa.
and what?
Paukwa.
How would you translate that?
It's just like there used to be, and it
There
happened.
used to be, yeah,
Yeah,
okay, that's great, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
paukwa. And then the listeners respond with pakawa. They all, that's how I
right.
get it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So every culture has these very specific ways of bringing the audience in. Hey, come with me. We're
Yeah.
going someplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so we felt that that was foundational. And adults. There's a tradition here that didn't start in the United States. I think we might have perfected it. It's called the tall tale,
Okay.
and you find these in every culture.
Yeah.
Ridiculous stories about things that could never happen.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early part of this country's history, Mark Twain, who was a great writer, wrote
Yeah.
Huckleberry Finn. Benjamin Franklin, who was one of the founders of the United States. These
Yes.
guys were writers, and they would write these remarkable stories and
Mm-hmm.
they would get published in Europe, and people thought in America this was that everything was bigger and more fantastic, and the stories always had a little tinge of believability.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
so people would they would reel them in, they would suck them right into those stories. And I think we adults, one way we entertain ourselves is to tell tall tales, to make up
Mm-hmm.
stories, and we get a lot of pleasure out of whether we can bring somebody. I've been doing that my whole life. My friends now go, "You telling the truth, or did you just make that up?" you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the second power of story is to communicate.
Yeah.
And so that's so fundamental, and we've all been telling stories to communicate, whether in our families or whatever, um, and we aren't always very effective communicators,
Mm-hmm.
and often we try to communicate by informing people and giving them data and giving them reasons why they should see it the way we see it, and we can give them
Mm-hmm.
information, and it turns out that doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
So if you want to change somebody's mind, you can't give them data and information. It actually tends to shut them down, and they tend to kind of double down on the way they see things.
Exactly.
So you have to find a way to use stories to be effective in communicating. And in my experience, most people are not very very effective at using stories. And I work, that's a lot of my work in organizations has been around that.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with a very large governmental organization last summer, the beginning of last summer,
Okay.
and they're part of their reporting. They're required to tell stories of some of the accomplishments, but these
Mm-hmm.
are all scientists and technical people.
Yeah.
They were terrible storytellers. They had to learn how to tell stories, and one of the things I often talk about is people go into meetings and they come in with their PowerPoint slides, and the slides are filled with copy, and they just read what's on the slides, and people want to shoot themselves. It's like so boring,
I can
and
imagine the torture.
it's torture. It's
Yeah.
terrible. And so I said, you know what, go in. Don't even bring. Have the data. If someone says, "Hey, show me the data,"
Yeah.
have it in your back pocket.
Mm-hmm.
You be prepared to pull it out.
Yeah.
And this one person said, "Yeah, I went to a major meeting with leaders. I had some slides with data on. I didn't put them up there. I
Mm-hmm.
just told a story of something we did in the field that made a difference in a community."
Yeah.
And my boss afterwards came up and said, "That was the best presentation I've seen in a long while."
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, "Oh, this stuff works," you know. So anyway, so there's a lot to be unpacked with that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really important that we learn how to be storytellers as communicators.
Yeah.
The third power is to enable learning. So we've already
Okay.
talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I didn't say to teach; I said to enable learning, because I don't think you really can teach anybody anything, but you can open them to learning new things.
And not always everyone is welcome to teaching. I mean, you say you're going to teach me? Okay.
Oh, wait a second. Who are you to teach me? Yeah, yeah.
You're going to
Um,
teach me?
and so because we've come up with this idea that teach, that means that you have the knowledge I don't, and if
Yeah.
you just talk for an hour, you can transport it to me, and I'll somehow absorb it.
Mm,
And the truth is we've probably forgotten most of what we learned in our
mm,
education because through that kind of education.
I agree.
So I explore that, and I think that's a crucial thing in education is that we enable people to be able to learn in a more, I think a more enjoyable way, but also more effective way.
Yeah, talk of
Um,
that, and I remember someone, I mean, one of my teachers in high school used to teach us a language, which is Swahili. And he used to come in, and instead of just teaching, he starts to tell us stories, life stories, and he will incorporate those stories with whatever he was about to teach on that day. And I'll tell you that Swahili was the most liked subject in my class.
right. And I bet you still remember a lot
I
of those
do still
stories.
remember. I do still remember many of the stories that he gave us.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's just so right on.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
the fourth power of story is the power to create meaning.
Okay. Create
And
me.
so we human beings, we need to find a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives.
Yeah.
It's essential.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have meaning and purpose, your life is not only feeling empty, you probably won't live a long life,
Mm,
and a lot of people go through life and never discover that for themselves.
many, many.
Yeah, and that's tragic. So um, there's lots of things that we can learn from the world of story about how to do that. And so one of the things we try to do is find a sense of what the researchers would call coherence.
Mm-hmm.
Coherence is things kind of hold together,
Yeah.
and this part of my life is connected to this part of my life, and the past is connected to the present, and it's
Mm-hmm.
connected to where I think I'm going in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out there's some researchers here in Atlanta at Emory University near
Okay.
me, and I've gotten a Marshall Duke and Robin Fivush, and I've become friends with them. And
Mm-hmm.
they've been studying intergenerational storytelling for 30 years.
Okay.
The stories we tell in our families
Mm-hmm.
and across generations from our, we
Yeah.
hear from our grandparents and from our uncles and aunts. Um, and they found that the best predictor of children having high self esteem and resilience
Mm-hmm.
is knowing their family stories.
Yeah.
And so, the question is, why is that? What
Mm-hmm.
is it? What's happening there? And there's a lot of dimensions to that. But we're born into a story.
Mm-hmm.
It's already left the train station. That story's ongoing,
Yeah.
and we're born into a story, and we don't have any stories when we come into this world.
Mm-hmm.
We have, I think we come into this world with inclinations and sort of personality traits. We're not just completely blank.
Mm-hmm.
We already have predispositions, and you can see it with siblings are very different. One, if you have a sibling, they may have a whole different personality.
Yeah. I agree.
Um, but we don't have any stories. And what do we need when we're facing difficulty?
Mm-hmm.
It's really, we need to be able to draw upon a memory of a time when we faced a difficulty like that and got through it.
Good. I
And
agree.
but if I don't have that story, what do I do as a young person?
Yeah.
And so, so what those but if I have my family stories, if I know what my father and mother did when they faced a challenge where maybe they had to move or they were displaced or they lost their jobs and we went
Mm-hmm.
through a hard time, but we all stuck together and we got through that.
Yeah.
Um, that becomes my story. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that becomes part of my story repertoire.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
now when I face a challenge as a young person, if I don't have a story that can kind of see me through the problem, I can
Mm-hmm.
go, well, mom and dad got through that,
Mm-hmm.
like something, I guess I can too. And so that becomes really a crucial touchstone for children.
Mm-hmm.
And they found that children knowing their family stories was a better predictor than anything else of them having resilience and high self-esteem.
Oh,
So, you know, as we grow older and we mature and we develop experiences, now we have our own body of stories to draw on,
yeah.
and that becomes useful for us.
Mm-hmm.
So story is really crucial in the life of families.
Yeah.
Um, the
Create
the
the meaning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and there's different kinds of there's a whole taxonomy of reminiscence, you know, where people have studied different kinds of ways we reminisce. And
Yeah.
um, you know, there's simple reminiscence, which is just sitting around, you know, talking about the good times.
Mm-hmm.
And even that has value. We developed a product for a healthcare system here in North Carolina
Mm-hmm.
called Living Stories, in which volunteers would go in and interview patients.
Yeah.
And they found, and one of the way, and they wanted to focus on the positive. So they said, well, just tell me about growing up and, you know, your favorite memories. Who was your
Mm-hmm.
best friend? What is the thing you love to do the most? And there's a saying that the body doesn't know the difference between a real event and an imagined one.
Yeah, it's
And
true.
so when we're recalling a time as a young person where we did something we love doing,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost as though our body is back doing that. It's getting bathed with all the biochemistry of that good experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we found that those kinds of stories actually reduce people's anxiety.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, we know if you watch the nightly news every night, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and it's filled with all kinds of stories about, you know, crime and all kinds of bad things, people
Yeah.
get scared, you know, and they feel unsafe, you know.
I don't watch the news. I don't watch the news myself.
Yeah, the news could be, you know, and even though maybe in their town crime
Yeah.
rate has been going down, but
Mm-hmm.
as far as they're concerned, it's not safe. It's going up because that's all they're hearing is these stories.
Yeah.
So the other kind of stories that's reminiscence support is called instrumental reminiscence, which is
Mm-hmm.
drawing upon a past event
Mm-hmm.
and a success to help you in the present.
Okay.
So that's kind of what we were talking about earlier with kids, you know, being able to draw upon these stories of getting through difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it becomes important for us as we get older
Yeah.
to transmit our wisdom to the next
Mm-hmm.
generation.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we do that? Often is through stories, right?
Stories again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the final kind of reminiscence is what's called integrative reminiscence, which is if we think of our life as a book
Mm-hmm.
that has chapters.
Yeah.
So, you know, and how do we integrate all the chapters? And even though there may be a chapter where oh boy, that was a terrible time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we want to leave that chapter out.
Mm-hmm.
But integrative reminiscence is finding a way to integrate it all together and even seeing the difficult experiences in life as part of our journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
the fifth power story is to transform.
Transform. Yeah.
To transform. And one of the things we talk about is that we have a term we call it a storyline.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can have an experience where something didn't go well.
Yeah.
But we're not, there are all kinds of ways all kinds of stories you could tell about that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're a salesman and you go out to sell something and you didn't get the sale, and some competitor, they bought your competitor's product, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Now you could tell a story like, well, oh, those people, they're jerks anyway. And, you know, I bet he paid them off. You know, I'm not going to call on those people ever again.
Mm-hmm.
That's a story you
That's
could
one
tell.
way. That's
That's a
one way.
story, you
Yeah.
know, but it has consequences because you'll never call on them again
Yeah.
and you'll never sell anything to them again.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell a different story. You go, maybe my presentation wasn't as good as it could have been.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I had brought this up, or maybe I had told them a story about a customer who had had success with my product. Maybe that would have made a difference. You know
Yeah.
what? I'm going to call on them again in 6 months, but I'm going to improve the way I talk about our products and see if
Uh-huh.
that works.
Yeah.
Well, that's a more empowering storyline, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, and then, There's one of the stories we tell, I share, is with from a really beloved storyteller here in this country, Donald Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells the story of his father when he was a young man.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in the early 1900s. And his parents, his dad and brothers were making shake shingles. They were out of wood for a
Okay.
little structure. And they
Mm-hmm.
had some very sharp tools and a little axe. And he was 5 years old and he wanted to play with that axe. And they said, no, 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 you're too young. You're going to hurt yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then around 1 o'clock, his mom called them to come in for what's called dinner here
Yeah.
in the
Mm-hmm.
South, but
Mm-hmm.
it's lunch.
Yeah.
And he held back. And after everybody went around the corner, he got that little axe out and he was chopping on all kinds of things and having a great time. And his mother noticed he wasn't there and called him again. And he went to try to put the axe back in the log and it bounced off and it went into his knee.
Mm-hmm.
And they found him there, and they wrapped it up. And his father, they didn't have a car. They got him on the horse and rode 3 miles to the town doctor, who
Yeah.
looked at the knee and said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. I think we're going to have to cut his leg off." And he goes, "Oh, no, 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 no." So he got him back on the horse and rode into town and found out where the nearest train was going.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually the nearest train, the next train was coming to Atlanta,
Yeah.
where I live, and there had just been a new hospital built called Grady, which is now the tertiary care hospital here. This is
Mm-hmm.
1905,
Mm-hmm.
and they saved his leg, but they had to take his kneecap off, and he was
Yeah.
always going to sort of walk with a limp. And when he got home, he was depressed. He said, "My life is ruined. I'm never going to be anything. I'll never amount to anything."
Mm-hmm.
And his mother started making him tell the story of what happened.
Yeah.
And he don't want to tell the story. I'm just a cripple. And she said, "Well, okay, now tell me the story in terms of what I and your dad learned from this." And then
Mm-hmm.
another day, "Tell me the story of what your nurses learned from this at Grady Hospital." And
Yeah.
this went on and on and on and on. And because his brothers were out working in the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he couldn't work in the field, so he was learning how to darn socks and do all kind of and weave flax and spin flax, and he
Mm-hmm.
was getting to read a lot. And one day he realized, he said, "Well, I get to read books and my brothers are out working." And he
Mm-hmm.
said, and he suddenly realized that putting that axe in his knee maybe was the best thing that ever happened to him. And he went on to become the banker in that town. So he had
Okay.
a very, but if that hadn't happened, he'd still be out like plowing the fields,
Yeah. Yeah.
because he went a different route. So we can't. And one of the things she said to him, which it's amazing the wisdom she had. She said, "If you don't tell that story is going to sit on top of you like a rock, and you'll be 50 years old, and you'll still be pitiful. You'll still be 5 years old and thinking you're a cripple.
Yeah.
But if you tell the story often enough, at some point you can crawl out from underneath that rock and sit on
Yeah.
top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just becomes a story about something that happened.
Do you
And it
think
doesn't
that
define you."
Do you think that most of us are not achieving our dreams because we've been sitting on our story?
I think that's true. We've been telling ourselves a story
Yeah.
that maybe limits us.
Okay.
Or we bought into a story that was told to us by
Yeah.
somebody else that said, "Well, you're not very smart. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You're not smart enough to go to college, or you're not smart enough to do that, or
Mm-hmm.
you should be doing this, not that." And we go, "Oh, okay." And so we followed along and we bought that story.
Yeah. Okay.
And so one of the things that we talk about is so important is that we have to become the authors of our own story.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
we have to unpack sometimes the stories we're living. We
Mm-hmm.
have to kind of take them out and look at them and go, "Where did this story come from?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
"Oh, that's the story my parents told me every day for
It's
years."
not my story.
It's not my story. That story
Yeah.
is not true about who I am.
Yeah.
And this is a story my society told me about who I am or who I should be. And
Mm-hmm.
and this is a story that my peers told me, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not who I am.
Yeah.
So the word author has its roots in the word authority.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whoever authors your story has authority
That's
over your
authority
life.
over
And
who.
if we don't take control of the story
Mm-hmm.
and look at that, and maybe some of those stories are stories we want to keep.
Yeah.
So, one of the things we say, we have treasures and we have trash from the past. Some of them are treasures. We
Yeah,
want to keep some of those stories. They're valuable for us.
yeah, sure, sure.
But some are not helping us and are not useful for us.
Hmm.
And so we often go to see a counselor, or a psychotherapist often,
Yeah.
who can help us. They're not enmeshed in our story.
Mm,
They're outside of our story. That
yeah.
story though becomes real for us.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
We can't see that it's just a story that we've adopted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's the way things are, whereas the person that we're talking with is not in that story and can see other possible storylines, right?
Yeah,
And so part of the healing process is to suddenly see, oh, I can let that story go.
yeah.
I want this story, and I'm going to start going in that direction.
I can write a new one.
I can write a new story. So I think that's probably maybe the most important thing we could share with your listeners today.
Wonderful.
I don't know how we're doing on time here, Anthony. We're getting close, but I'll
Yeah.
tell you the last two paragraphs real quickly.
Okay.
The sixth is to unite,
Unite. Okay.
and so we live in a world today which is not very united.
Mm,
I can just speak about this country, but I think it's true in a lot of other areas of the world
mm-hmm.
where people are living very different stories about the way things are.
Yeah.
And so stories can be used and have been used by leaders in the past to create enmity and fear and distrust of others who are different from us.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we can also use stories to bring people together.
And there I agree with you because what I imagine is there would not be war between two countries if one leader did not come out and speak some words and give a story of what is to happen. No war could have happened, but these wars are started by the words that someone speaks, and they are stopped by words that the leader speaks. So I
Yeah,
agree to that. I
yeah.
agree.
Words are very powerful,
Yeah.
and we can look throughout history and even recent history. I mean, on the continent you grew up in, Rwanda.
Mhm.
What happened in Rwanda? The leaders were fomenting all kinds of. They were calling the Tutsis roaches and less
Yeah.
than human,
Mhm.
and so they infected the minds of people to go out and perpetrate terrible atrocities.
They
So we
came
don't have to look very far in history, but you can go back. You know, I'm Jewish, so you go back to Nazi Germany. What
Yeah.
were the stories being told then? Same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The same
So
thing.
yeah, so the last power story maybe is the most important in some kind of ways. Is
Yeah.
that's to envision possibilities.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is the part of the brain we use for storing memories and for telling stories
Uh-huh.
is also the part of the brain we use for envisioning the future.
Yeah.
So the better we can imagine the future, imagine the story we want to create in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
I think the more we can actually make it real.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can imagine it, we can then construct the road work, the roadway to get there.
Yeah.
And there's some really interesting studies that have been done on this. They took there was a study done in the university, one of the universities here in this country, and they took a group of students. They split them into two groups,
Mm-hmm.
classic kind of A and B groups. And one, they said, I want you to imagine you getting an A in
Mm-hmm.
this class.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine what it's going to be like when you get your A.
Yeah.
And the second group, they said, we want you to imagine you get an A, but we want you to think about the steps you would have to take to get an A.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me the story of what you would have had to do to get to the A.
Yeah.
And it turns out that group outperformed the other group
Mm-hmm.
significantly,
Mm-hmm.
significantly.
Yeah.
Um, so we know the imagination is a very powerful simulation machine.
Mm-hmm.
We can simulate the future and then we can then create it.
Mm-hmm.
So learning how to do that well requires, I think, narrative or storytelling skills.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we do that, the better we become at it. I think the better we can create the world we want to create.
Yeah, sure.
And so one of the things that, I'm going to go back to the six power story to unite again. I have a colleague, who's in Washington, D.C., Paul Costello.
Okay.
And he's been working with groups of young people in their 20s who've been coming to D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
often from war torn or areas of conflict. He started
Mm-hmm.
out working with Protestants and Catholics from Belfast, Ireland, in
Mm-hmm.
Northern Ireland before
Mm-hmm.
there, this is going back 25 years ago, before there was a peace deal that was created.
Yeah.
And there's an event that happened in 1928.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Bloody Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, the IRA attacked the British soldiers or the Protestants, and by the end of the day, over 100 people had died. A thousand homes have been damaged or destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
and hundreds of people have been injured.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that story is still told today in the pubs like it happened yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
people keep alive stories when they have grievances. They can keep those stories alive. And so he found that when he first started working with these groups, they were trying a different thing. They were trying to kind of have a encounter groups where people were, and it wasn't getting anywhere because everyone had their story, and the story always made the other group the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized that wasn't very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things he posed to them, he says, I'm interested in your story, your authentic story about your experience, not the story about what happened, but your personal experiences. And the real question is, what story do you want to create now?
Yeah.
What story do you want to create today
Mm-hmm.
together?
Mm-hmm.
And that led to a very different outcome. He's
Yeah.
been working with Israelis and Palestinians. We've just had another war in that territory. And that conflict looks like it's such a complicated story. Everyone's got their story
Mm-hmm.
about this little piece of land
Yeah.
and who should own it, and who was there first, and it could go on and on and on. And until people are willing to come together and say, okay, that's the past story, what story can we create together
Yeah.
today?
Yeah. And
um,
the way I see it is, it's always the bad story from the other side. It's not my story that is bad. It's
it's
that's how
there, yeah, it's
that's
them.
theirs. It's their story. Their story is the bad one. My story
Yeah,
is the good one.
that's
So,
right.
so,
Yeah,
so,
we're always the right one, they're the ones who are in the wrong. And
so we need to change the whole story, and things are
yeah,
going to be better. We're
yeah,
going to be united. So thank you very much for these powers of storytelling. We've got transport being one, the other one is communicate, learning, create meaning, transform, unite, and envision possibilities. I'm starting to envision some great possibilities in the future.
fabulous, fabulous.
Yeah. So thank you very much. And we are almost done. We may not finish the whole book here, but that's the chance that we give the listener to buy the book so that he can draw the stories in the book and get to have the full picture. Now, talk of the picture. I got to learn that you are an artist.
Yes, I am an artist as
I was
well.
an
So,
artist. I also paint.
oh,
Now,
so that's behind me. That's one of
that's
my
one of your art.
pieces.
Okay, that's it's beautiful. I love
Thank
it.
you.
I love it. And how does storytelling with art come together?
Well, that's a good question. Because for me, they creativity comes from the same place. And whether you're a writer or you're a painter or a sculptor or maybe a dancer or a musician, um, I think they well up from the same place. But for me, it's interesting. Art is different than stories.
Mhm.
And when I'm painting, I'm often not thinking of a story.
Yeah.
Now, some artists do.
Hmm.
Okay. And for a long time, I really resisted giving my works of art titles,
Yeah.
because what happens, I think, for people is when they go into a studio, a gallery, or a museum, they want to know what's the title. Oh, it's little boy walking with balloon. Oh, okay. And now they've got the story, and they stop seeing,
Yeah.
they stop looking,
Hmm.
and then they move on to the next painting.
Hmm.
And so sometimes story can, by giving people a title for a painting, it they want to know what should I think about this,
Yeah.
instead of what do I feel, what do I see, what, so because art is total sensory experience. So
Mm.
but for me, and it's interesting, I've lived in between those two modalities since I've been writing a lot the last couple of years on this book.
Yeah.
I've not been painting as much. I just haven't had the space to be in that modality, and so I've started painting again a little,
Okay.
and so but art, as a young man, I actually dropped out of graduate school to go study painting in Chicago at the Art Institute, to the
Okay.
horror of my parents. They thought I was ruining my life,
That's a
you
beautiful story.
know. and
A
and
beautiful story there. Yes.
so that was a place of following what my story was, is that
Okay.
they wanted me to kind of become a psychologist.
Mhm.
After I'd started my ad agency years ago, I got a call from my mother one morning,
Okay.
and my parents had built a hotel in Tampa, Florida, and it opened when the oil embargo happened. This is probably predates you, Anthony, but in the early 1970s, the OPEC
Okay.
embargoed oil, and there were lines. People were lined up to get gas everywhere. And the hotel had not. It was really struggled, and they
Yeah.
almost lost it.
Mhm.
And she called me and she said, "Dad and I've been talking. We want to pay for you to go back and finish your PhD in psychology."
Yeah.
And I said, "Mom, what I really like to do is get an MFA in art." And she
Mhm.
says, "Absolutely not." And that
Yeah.
was the end of the conversation. So
Yeah.
she had a story that she wanted me to be a doctor, and I had a story I wanted to be an artist.
Yeah.
And so we have to follow what Joseph Campbell calls follow our bliss.
Yeah. Follow, please make our own stories
Yeah,
and live it.
that's right.
Yeah, that's very, 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 very wonderful. And we are very honored to have you tell us about the powers of storytelling. And eventually, we're going to read your book. Now, is this your only book, or do you have a
No, no. So Story Intelligence, this book, Story Intelligence, just came out. I have a couple other books. I've got
Yeah.
The Healing Art of Storytelling, which came
Mhm.
out in the 90s, still
Yeah.
available on Amazon.
Okay.
And I wrote a children's novel
Yeah.
called The Kingdom of Nowt, Nowt,
Yeah.
and that is still available.
Okay.
And I have another book that I co-authored with a colleague here called The Patient Survival Handbook, which is a whole other thing that I was involved with, a healthcare consulting group here in
Okay.
Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
But it was really about helping patients figure out how to navigate the healthcare system.
Yeah.
But that was not really the central thing of my life.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't hear a book about the stories you had at hospice.
Well, I do have a book I created called Stories of the Family Legacy, which I self-published years ago. And it's
Oh,
not, if people are interested, it's a small book, but it's really,
yeah.
it's like 40 pages to help you find ideas for sharing stories with families. And it's still available. So if people write to me, they can contact me at storyintelligence.com.
Yes.
Storyintelligence.com. They can find out information on the new book there as well. And there's
Okay.
lots of interviews with some experts on story, and some blogs, and a lot of other good stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's been a great, great, great time. And we really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And now we know about story intelligence. Please, I remind you, each and every of the viewers, it's storyintelligence.com. Connect with Richard over there and get to hear some more stories. Don't miss it. Thank you very much, Richard, and
Yeah,
have
thank
a
you.
great day. Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me on the
And
show,
thank you
Anthony.
for the viewers too for being with us, even those who are watching the recorded version. Thank you very, very much.